Tonight we have a very special guest speaker, Dr. Victor Davis Hanson. Dr. Hanson is a senior fellow at the Cruz. He was a full-time farmer before joining Cal State University of Fresno in 1984 to initiate a classics program. In 1991, he was awarded an American Excellence in Teaching Award, which is given to the country's top undergraduate teachers in Greek and Latin. In 2007, he was awarded the National Humanities Medal. He's a regular contributor to the op-ed pages of the San Jose Mercury and always generates a flow of critical letters to the editor of the Liberals in Santa Clara County following one of his excellent articles. Here to talk about postmodern Middle East policy, I am very pleased and honored to present to you Dr. Victor Davis Hanson.
Thank you very much. I come up from Selma, California each week to the Hoover Institution. I always feel like I'm a stranger in a strange land. Something about being in Selma in the morning and on University Avenue getting something to eat. I feel like I'm a foreigner and I need a passport. So when somebody asked me to speak to conservatives, I thought that they were a dying species. They didn't exist in this area. So it's a great honor to be here. I'd like to talk a little bit about his foreign policy tonight. Of course, before we even begin, we have to comment on this wonderful, can I say it, assassination, targeted killing, accident. I think like you, you're a little, I don't know, put out that the administration is really wrestling with the narrative. We don't know whether he was armed, he wasn't armed, he used a human shield, he didn't use a human shield, he fought back. We don't care, he's dead. The reason that they are a little upset is, if you think about it, almost every element of the anti-terrorism protocol of the last 8 years was essential in killing bin Laden, and every single one of them was opposed by candidate and Senator Barack Obama. Think about it. A lot of the information came from detainees in Guantanamo. Guantanamo, of course, in Barack Obama's parlance, was Al-Qaeda's chief, quote, recruiting tool, and he was promised to shut it down in a year. And when we had people like the chauffeur of bin Laden himself interrogated people around Obama, Obama himself said these were minor people, even though we know now a minor courier gave very important information. We were told that we engaged in torture because we waterboarded how many people? 3. Among them, the architects of 9/11, who apparently gave some very valuable information, which Obama, the lawyer, and Harold Cole, the lawyer, apparently didn't follow liberal jurisprudence because they used that evidence even though they felt that it had been obtained wrongly. And then we engaged in, as we have, in predator assassinations. Remember, Obama said as a candidate, that's airborne terror. And if you hadn't remembered, Barack Obama has killed 1,700 people by predator drone attack. That's more in 27 months than George Bush killed in 8 years. So if we look at tribunals, which we were told were unfair, preventive detention, which was taboo, they're all accepted. Obama embraced or accepted or expanded every single one. Wiretaps, intercepts, predator drones, rendition, which was very critical in finding the information. He called that a knock on the door at the night. Obama did. Guantanamo. Every single element of the Bush-Cheney anti-terrorism protocols were essential in finding and killing bin Laden, and every single one of them was at one point rejected or ridiculed or caricatured by Barack Obama. Which brings us to the topic tonight, postmodern. I know that's a fancy academic word. What do we mean by postmodern foreign policy? Well, postmodernism is a term that developed in France in the last 20 years, and it essentially says the reaction against modernism. So if you have a classical poem, you all know that it rhymes. You have a particular poetic vocabulary, Keats, Longfellow, Wordsworth, And then the modernists came in and said poems didn't have to rhyme. Some were very good, Walt Whitman, they didn't have to have a particular vocabulary. If you were an artist, there were classical paintings, landscape painters, Northern Renaissance, Rembrandt, and then modernism came in, the Impressionists, Picasso. You didn't have to put on the canvas what the eye sees. And in diplomatic terms, there was classical diplomacy, that a nation worried about its national interest. Just like individuals who have a house, that they like their lawn to be well kept, they like their door to be locked at night. So they dealt in classical protocols, balance of power, deterrence, military preparedness. And then modernism came along. What was modernism? Diplomacy sort of ushered in by Woodrow Wilson. That nations could be a family together. You could have the League of Nations. They could subordinate their national interests. So you see where I'm going. Just as postmoderns said to the modernists, well, when we reject your rejection of classism, there is no rules. So I'm going to take the bird sat on a wire and put bird up here and draw a picture of it, and that's a poem. And I reject Picasso's rejection of classical. I'm going to urinate in a jar and put a crucifix, and that now is art. I'm a postmodern artist. Well, a counterpart was Barack Obama came and says, I reject the rejection of classicism. I'm going to form a foreign policy that's totally incoherent. And I don't know what it is. So I said, I was driving up here and somebody called today and said, what are you speaking on? And I said, the foreign policy of Barack Obama. And he said, you know what it is? And I said, no, but I said postmodern. So that helps a little bit. So what is it? Well, let's look at the Middle East, because that's where all of our attention has been focused since January. 21, depending on whether we count Turkey, 21 or 22 countries. And they're at various stages of unrest, even rebellion. And what are they angry about? Well, they're angry for, I think, two reasons. One, there's countries in the Middle East that are richly endowed, especially in fossil fuels, and they're poor. So if you look at the GDP of Egypt and compare it to South Korea, or the GDP of Algeria or Tunisia and compare it with Chile, something went wrong. They should be much wealthier. I won't even mention Switzerland or Japan. So something's happening in the Middle East that's not producing capital and freedom and safety in a way that other countries that have just a fraction of their natural resources are able to be quite prosperous. And what are those practices? You know them, I know them. They're called A, tribalism, where people pick their first cousin rather than somebody who's based on merit for a job. Religious fundamentalism, especially religious intolerance. Gender apartheid, they removed half the population's brain power. They cannot participate fully in the economic system. They have legacy of Soviet statism. The economy is state-run. Well, you put tribalism and religious intolerance and religious fundamentalism and gender apartheid and statism and authoritarian government, and you have the ingredients for chaos. Okay, they had chaos, so what's the problem now? They've always had chaos. Well, the problem now is there's such things called cell phones and internets and DVDs and Skype, and suddenly somebody in the slums of Cairo could see somebody pretty well off in Chile or Colombia or South Korea. And they said, why didn't we have that? Which I'm getting to the point is, I wish there was a lot of self-reflection going on in this unrest. I wish when CNN and the BBC interviewed somebody said, my gosh, we got Mubarak, or we got Ben Ali, or we got Ahmadinejad, or we got Assad, because they're the logical culmination of our system. And if we didn't have them, we'd have to reinvent them. Because that's who you get when your values are such as they are, and you don't welcome enlightened reform. But we didn't hear that. We didn't hear that. I know that there are rebellions and uprisings against whom? Monarchs in the Gulf, strongmen in Egypt and Tunisia, theocrats in Iran, military juntas in Libya. Some of them are anti-American, some of them are pro-American. But they all have one thing in common. The people who are overthrowing them are not introspective. They're either saying the Soviets put them in, or the Americans put them in, or the Jews put them in. They don't say on camera, they don't say we put them in. And until they do that, it's very hard for us to just jump in and try to foster constitutional government. We can do it, and we finally did it in Iraq, but you have to put a gun to somebody's head, force them to do it, put U.S. troops there, and we don't want to go through that again, as we see in Afghanistan. So it's a time to walk very carefully, because we don't know who the rebels are. Just because somebody is on CNN or the BBC and he was a former professor, he's a surgeon, does not mean that he's typifies this rebellion. As you saw a lot of YouTubes, there's a lot of people in Libya today that are executing Gaddafi's people, and they're beheading them, and they're almost as bad as Gaddafi. So the cardinal rule is do no harm. You like to encourage constitutional government to the degree that you have influence, but you have to be very careful, because so far these movements, whether they're in Iran or whether they're in Syria or whether in Libya, we like to encourage them, but we don't know the nature of them. And we like to see introspection, and said we're getting scapegoated. Usually us. Okay. So what does a postmodernist do? He does just the opposite. He tells he waits and waits and waits and waits and waits until 51% of the people do not like Mubarak. Joe Biden said he's not a dictator. Finally, we learned he's a dictator. He's got to go. He's already going. And then Mr. Ben Ali, earlier, pro-American authoritarian. He was a friend, he's a friend, he's a friend, a friend. The crowd gets bigger. 51%, the magical number. He's gone. Well, we were always a day late and a dollar short, so we got the worst of both worlds. As you remember, by March, we didn't have pro-American authoritarians, who, by the way, were more liberal than the population. If you give a plebiscite, the people in the population will be far more anti-American, anti-Semitic than much more religiously intolerant than Mubarak. But that's something that we tried to work on, but they're gone now. So then we had the third one in Libya, and it looked like it was going to follow the same pattern. After about 9 days, people said, Barack, you're too slow. You're piling on. Gaddafi's at Ghana. The insurgents have taken Benghazi. They're right outside Tripoli. And before you go pick the Final Four, before you play golf, before you go to Rio, just at least say that you want to get in. Even the Europeans are getting in. They have 12 tornadoes. They've got 15 Tomahawk missiles. They're jumping in. No one said to the president, well, they're jumping in because they were in bed with Gaddafi. They released Tripoli, the Lockerbie bomber to Tripoli, and they were worried that their quite lucrative oil concessions might go out the window of Gaddafi, and they wanted to switch sides because they thought the rebels would be in Tripoli in about 48 hours. That's pretty much why the Europeans do anything. But nevertheless, Obama, this time, on the advice of whom? Susan Rice, the UN ambassador, Hillary Clinton, the Secretary of State, and the ubiquitous Samantha Power, the special national security advisor in the Middle East, all suggested that this was a golden teachable moment in postmodern moments. It was almost as if it was served up on a platter. Think about it. He's going to go anyway. You get in on the going, the 11th hour. There won't be anything to do. It'll be multilateral. You can say it's not like George Bush. We can go ask the UN, and we can go ask the Arab League, but we definitely won't ask the U.S. Congress, so we can subordinate U.S. military forces for the first time to international order. Anybody won't be killed, and he'll be gone. We can take credit, and we can not only have a change, but we can show the world that now we are subordinate to international bodies of opinion, and it's a win-win situation. Now, any of you in the audience, if you had been in those meetings, would say, well, wait a minute. Gaddafi's not a Mubarak, he's not a Ben Ali. Those guys were pro-American. To the extent that a bad guy's pro-American, that means we force the BBC and the CNN to go in there, and they have free, coverage of the press, and they can't go murder people. But this guy can